Let's dive deeper into our app architecture. As mentioned before, on the backend, we'll have Node, Express, and Mongo. So we'll focus on setting up these frameworks first. And just to quickly cover these technologies, Mongo is a database, specifically a NoSQL database, and it allows us to work with JavaScript, which is nice because all of these technologies allow us to work with JavaScript so we can keep that unified across the front end and back end. Next, Express is a lightweight web framework. It will allow us to create the web API that our front end will communicate with. And finally, Node is the glue that holds these technologies together and allows us to develop our complete back-end app. Next, let's take a look at the front end. Once we finish setting up our back-end environment in this video, we'll then focus on the front end and set up our Angular environment. And of course, Angular is the framework which will allow us to create our browser web application. So now that we have a rough idea of the architecture, let's begin and set up our back-end environment. Head over to nodejs.org and let's download the current version, which at the time of this recording is 8.1.2. Then go ahead and run through the installation steps. And let's do a quick test to see that Node was installed. So inside your terminal or command prompt, let's type in node space -v for version. And you can see that we are getting the correct version. At this point, we'll need to start using an editor, and I personally like to use Visual Studio Code. Next, please go ahead and navigate over to where you'll be creating the project for your backend. And then let's create a folder for our project. And I'll call it backend. So now that we have our backend folder, let's go ahead and open it inside our editor. And since we don't have any files in that folder, it will have an empty list on the left. You can continue to work with the terminal or command prompt at this point, but I'll be using the built-in Visual Studio Code terminal, and I'll launch that from View, Integrated Terminal. Next, let's focus on creating the Node.js package JSON file. So to do that, I'll type in npm init, and I'll leave all the default options for now. And as you can see, the package.json file is listed. Next, let's go ahead and install Express.js. So I'll type in npm install express, and then I'll type in -- save. And if we check our package.json file, we should see it in the dependency list. Okay, now let's create our first JavaScript file. So I'll create a new file and call it server.js. We'll do a very quick hello world test with our Express.js server to make sure everything's working. The first thing I'll do is require in Express.js. Then let's create an app object for Express. And now let's create a generic get route which will display hello world. And I'll do that through the app object by typing app.get. And we won't have any specific route name, so that any URL will take us to this route. Then I'll use an arrow function and get the request and response. And I'll send the response that says hello world. Also, I had the old habit of adding semicolons to the end of my lines, and I'm trying to work that out, so I might do that now and then, and I'll just go back and remove them. And just a quick side note about that, it's really just personal preference, it doesn't affect your code. Then finally, to get our Express.js server listening, I'll type in app.listen, and I'll pass in the port, and I'll make it 3000. Let's save that, and then inside our terminal, let's start it by typing node server.js. Let's go back to our browser, and we'll change the URL to localhost ;3000. And as we can see, we're getting our hello world. So now we have our backend set up. We've set up Node and we've set up Express.js. The final piece that we'll introduce at some point later on is Mongo. Next, let's take a look at the front end.